Hello, everybody, and welcome to the GMS Magazine YouTube channel and podcast. This is Paco Garcia, your host, and this is the RPG Interview Room, the show in which I have the enormous pleasure of getting together with some of the coolest people in the industry and talk about their projects and their jobs. Last week, I was interviewing Lynn Hardy from KOCM, and this week, I have an indie developer, which I think is probably the only one to come out from South Africa yet. I'm talking about Gareth Graham from Frenzy Kitty Games. I've already seen, and if you are a friend of the podcast, you may have already listened to some of the interviews I've done with him in the past. I have liked his work for a while, so much so that when he published Children of the Fall, I even published a book in Spanish. Yeah, it is that good. Now he is out with another game. This time is a pulp horror game called Something Wicked. So it's a game inspired in the kind of 1920s and 30s and even 40s horror. Something very pulpy, very, very different. Now, because it's Gareth's work, I am already interested because he has some very, very good ideas. But also because I wanted to know, there are plenty of horror games out there, and I was genuinely curious as to what does this game have to offer to the games that are already in the market. So I wanted to have him around. If you are listening to the podcast, just so you know that the video is going to have some samples of the layout and the illustrations of the book. So by all means, join the YouTube channel. If you want to see this video on the go, then, well, take a look at the podcast, because you will not be able to see anything because of the podcast, but you will be able to listen to it anywhere you go. Either way, please remember to subscribe and leave us a comment and leave us a review in iTunes if you're listening to the podcast, because that helps an insane amount. Anyway, without further ado, thank you for being there, and here is Gareth. Okay, Gareth, welcome back. Welcome back to the show after 7 months, a year. When were you here last?
Gosh, yeah, it must be sort of about a year, maybe 10 months, a long time. Too long.
Yes.
Too long.
Yes, that's very true. But you're here now. And you have a new game, but I still have to ask you the 5 weird questions.
Yes, yeah. No one dodges that bullet.
No. So, but because you already know the questions, I'm going to change them for you.
Okay, good.
But
Yes.
I'm going to make it easier for you. And I am going to make them more visual by using stuff I have around my table.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Mice or mobile phones?
Mice.
Okay, mice. Okay.
Do I need to elaborate or?
No.
Okay.
Tea mugs or tape measurements?
Oh, tea mugs. You couldn't live without a tea mug. I don't know when last I measured something and wasn't disappointed.
Okay. My wallet or my gimbal?
Oh, your gimbal. Absolutely.
Oh, thank goodness, because it's a lot more money if you sell it than
Exactly, and I don't know if euros are going to do me any good in Cape Town. So.
Okay. A highlighter or a mechanical pencil?
Oh, mechanical pencil.
Okay, good.
Sharpeners are for nerds.
And last but not least, my mouse case or a mic support?
Oh man, that's difficult. Mouse case.
Okay, good, because that mouse costs a lot more than this.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Excellent. You can't beat a good mouse. There's nothing worse than using a terrible mouse. It's shocking.
That's absolutely true. And I tell you, I spent a lot of money in this mouse, and I know that people are not interested at all in mice, but I can tell you that spending 100 euros in the mouse makes quite a difference for your hand and your productivity.
Total. I used to use a trackball. That was when I was Mr. Cool using the track.
Actually, when I use that, I have a trackball that I use when I'm sitting on the sofa, and I am at the computer and I cannot move my hand around. So
it's super convenient. Or if you're lying in bed and you can just because I hate trackpads. I can't do the trackpad.
Oh no,
thing.
hell no!
I feel like I'm like a
no. That's just evil. That's just evil.
It's
Right. Okay. So anyway, you have a horror game coming out.
Yeah, I do. Yes, it's out at the moment. Yeah.
Is it already out?
Yeah, it came out on Saturday. You need
I
to
thought-
check your Facebook messages.
I thought no, seriously, I thought it was coming out in March. I really, for some reason, I had in my mind that it was coming out in March.
Well, it's almost March, so we can. Oh no, what is it? The 11th? Oh, yeah. Okay, God.
Well, okay, that's true. Okay, but anyway, come on. What's his name? Tell me about it.
Okay, so the game is called Something Wicked, and it is a sort of pulp horror role-playing game. Sort of, if you think maybe Call of Cthulhu, but a little more on the pulpier side. So that sort of, think Call of Cthulhu meets Indiana Jones. If those are the kinds of stories that interest you or intrigue you, then this is the game that I think can sort of execute that quite well.
And I don't think we need to know anything else about the game. We're just going to go and get it. So excuse me.
Okay, done.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's been real.
Okay. I know that you're fond of horror themes, and you're definitely not scared of tackling hard topics like you did with Children of the Fall.
Yes.
Why go with something like a Cthulhu pulpy game when, let's face it, there are so many of them?
There are. I think so. So this game started. I actually looked and I actually started writing it back in 2017, and I got quite far with it. And then I got as far as I thought I could go with my current skill set. And then I put out Karma and put out Children of the Fall. And then I came back to it this year, and I thought, okay, now I've got the sort of what I need to finish it. And I think when I looked at sort of a lot of the pulp horror games, there's amazing stuff out there. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of them are quite sort of rules dense. And I wanted something, I know it kind of just seems like my sort of stuck record, but I like stuff very streamlined, very straightforward. And I think a lot of those games do the horror stuff very well, but they're dense and they're not great for the pulpy sort of stuff. Like, if you think about a story like Indiana Jones, you want to have those moments where the character will swing on a vine and
Yes.
be all heroic. And if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, he's going to fall into the bloody volcano. There's no two ways about it.
Okay.
And I think that, so it was the density of the rules that I wanted to sort of try something different with. And also just do something that had that sort of pulp feel to it, in addition to the horror.
Okay, let's go in parts in that case. Tell me a little bit about the book. What is it like?
Okay, so it's 80 pages, and essentially it is, the majority of it is a rules set, a rules toolkit. There's not sort of any adventures or scenarios or that sort of thing in there. I mean, there's examples of play, but it really is more of a toolkit to let you sort of tell these pulp horror stories. Yeah, and it's a fairly sort of, if we're looking at modern role-playing games, so it's a GM'd game, which is sort of unusual for me. Normally I do the GM-less sort of thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm really excited about the book is that it uses all the artwork in it is authentic pulp artwork from sort of the golden era of pulp sort of fiction magazines and comics and that sort of thing. So I licensed a whole bunch of this pulp artwork, and so the book has really got that sort of vintage feel to it, even though it's obviously a modern product.
Okay, is it a contemporaneous game, or is it based in where?
So in terms of, it's not super prescriptive in terms of the setting. Like I said, I wanted it to be more of a toolkit than anything else. So if we think about the setting, I suppose a lot of the rules and the sort of items that we talk about are stuff that would fit into your 1920s sort of your typical Lovecrafty sort of setting. But there's no real reason that you can't sort of just transplant that over into a modern setting. Mechanically, there won't be a lot of difference in terms of how the game actually plays and what the players and GM do. So yeah, it is quite sort of open and flexible as a rule set. But in terms of the look and feel of the book and some of the sort of examples of play, it definitely has that 1920s to 1940s Indiana Jones, H.P. Lovecraft feeling to it.
Mechanically, as you said, you have traditionally created GM-less GM-less games, or GM's full game, as Children of the Fall was. What are the mechanics like?
Okay, so In terms of how you play the game, it's very, very straightforward. I was obviously quite heavily inspired by the 2d6 mechanism of sort of the whole Apocalypse World system, but it should be clearly stated that it's not powered by the Apocalypse game. Essentially, you have a list of stats like you would in a Dungeons and Dragons, but these are particularly appropriate for a pulp game. So I'll just go through the stats and tell you what they are. So they are physique, which is obviously your character's strength; subterfuge, so how sneaky they are, how good they are in disguises. You've got knowledge and occult; combat; social, which is obviously how good they are at sort of interviewing people, getting things out of social situations; and investigation. So you have those 7 stats, and essentially you will assign sort of modifiers to those stats when you do your character, and those are just sort of plus a number or minus a number, and you're rolling 2d6, adding or subtracting the appropriate modifier against a challenge rating, and that determines whether the test succeeds or fails. In addition to that, there's certain sort of mechanical things that we've included to add that pulpy feeling. So every character's got what they call a pool of moxie points.
Okay.
And moxie is like, you know, your character's chutzpah, their sort of determination to do something really amazing. So you can spend moxie to add additional dice into the pool, and the GM can reward the players replenishing their moxie when they do some really good role playing or they solve a particularly tricky scenario. So it's a lot of give and take, and it's all about enabling the players to really tell these stories of these amazing, heroic, exciting characters. It's a game that really celebrates the characters, which I think is quite different from a lot of the other horror games that you get out there, where I think a lot of them are quite oppressive, and I do understand that, but sometimes you just want to feel like you're playing a badass, and this game really lets you say, you know what, I'm going to take my gun and I'm going to shoot that chandelier and it's going to land on this cultist's head, and I'm going to pretty much make sure that I've got a damn good chance of that happening.
Okay, that makes it sound, though, and don't take this wrongly, but it makes it sound as the game can be a little bit on the easy side, and for a horror game, not being too challenging. How does that work?
Well, I mean, the challenge is something that is scalable by the GM, and as I said, the Moxie pool is something that's limited. So I don't want you to think that it's something that there's just an endless supply of. But one of the things that should be said is that the challenge, like the numbers that the players are trying to roll, can be pretty high. So it's not like you're rolling 2d6 and trying to get a 4 or higher. It's like you want to get a 10 or higher. So it's some of the challenge rating, it's called, can be quite tricky, and combat in particular is very deadly, and that was sort of intentional because, you know, when your character encounters something scary, you want them to almost try and avoid combat if possible, and come up with a clever solution, like you would see in those, you know, like Indiana Jones would rather, I don't know, shoot out a boulder that would fall on their head, and rather than just get into a fist fight. Yep. So the game encourages that, and as a result, combat and that sort of thing are pretty deadly. So, and okay. Yeah, the challenges, I think that the GM can just scale them as they see fit.
You've mentioned some of the stats of the characters, but tell me about the character creation. How does it work?
Okay, so essentially, when you have your when you want to do your character creation, it's you initially get these points that you can distribute among the 7 stats, and that's fairly straightforward. Essentially, you have 6 positive modifier points and 6 negative modifier points. So what that'll mean is that you can distribute them as you want, but you'll end up inevitably having some stats that you are actively good at and some stats that you are actively bad at. So unless you want to be very, very boring, you'll have these characters that will have things that they are good at and things that they are bad at. But in addition to that, you also have a list of talents that you choose from. There's about 25 or 30 of them. And these are keywords that describe sort of occupations and personalities and the kinds of characters and talents that you would have in a 1920s pulp situation. And these sort of give them modifiers. I'm just going to them in the book so I can tell you a little bit about them. Talk amongst yourselves for a moment. Okay, yeah. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of these different talents, and they will help you sort of, in addition to fleshing out your character also give you a mechanical advantage. And then you have two other things. There's something that's called the one thing, and this is the thing about your character that makes them curious and makes them want to find out more about the world. And the other thing, which is something I've kind of lifted directly from Children of the Fall, is your character's secret, which is something that I worked quite well. That's sort of obviously something that the other characters don't know about. So if we think about the one thing, I'm just looking at some of the example characters we have here. So the one character is a reporter called Jamie Wolfe, a tabloid journalist, and their talents are librarian, which means anything to do with books or research or writing. So their one thing, the thing that pushes them, is they're tired of being stuck in the tabloid space, and they're looking for a story to kickstart their journalism career. So that's what's pushing them to explore and learn more. So these are sort of all things that add a mechanical advantage and also add depth and dimension to your characters.
How long are those characters meant to last? I mean, do they have like an expiry date, like it happens in other horror games like Call of Cthulhu and such, that they're going to go insane?
Yes, so there is a sort of, I don't like to use the word sanity or whatever. So we have what we call the terror track, and the GM can ask the players to make a terror test anytime they encounter something sort of terrifying. And there's certain sort of enemies in the bestiary that will automatically trigger a terror test. And what happens is there's a roll for that, and the more terror you accumulate, the higher or the easier it is for you to get more terror. And for every 4 terror points you take what's called a condition. So that could be a stutter, or you have an uncontrollable shake. And they don't have mechanical implications, but they have storytelling and role-playing implications. And then you also have your health clock. So instead of traditional health points, we have a clock, and it's divided up into 12 sections, just like a normal clock. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, as you take damage, if you take damage and it just fills in spaces on the first half of your clock, you'll start healing naturally over time. But once you go over the halfway point, you'll start degrading over time, and then more and more rapidly as it goes. Okay. So it's quite interesting. So you want to make sure that you don't get hurt. But in terms of deadliness, look, the characters are not going to last if they just go first into every confrontation. But if you're clever about it, they can survive, but probably not more than 5 or 6 sessions.
Okay. So this is not a game for long campaigns.
No, there is advancement in it, but it's very, very sort of loose and relaxed advancement rules. And essentially, the game, I think the sweet spot is maybe between 4 and 6 sessions. That's when you can tell a really cool story, let your character shine, and then move on to the next thing.
Okay. You mentioned about this game being a toolkit more than a set kind of rule. What has been the process to actually create a toolkit? Because toolkits are not particularly easy to do, because they're meant to cater for a lot more than a prescripted game.
Yeah, so I mean, it was both born out of my own sort of particular skill set. Like for me as a writer and a designer, I think where my skills lie is in coming up with mechanics and systems and numbers that work together really well, rather than and that's sort of evident in some of my other games. If you look at Children of the Fall, it's like it's a story. There's a story there, but it really is, for me, all about those rules and how they click together to tell that story. Other designers are like, you get guys like Robin Laws and Kenneth Haidt, who have both. They can do these amazing systems, but they can also really write like incredible adventures and scenarios. That's not my strong point. So initially, when I was first coming up with the game, I was going to say, okay, it's going to have these adventures in it. And as I looked at it, I thought, this is just not what I'm good at. I'm good at numbers and I'm good at designing tools. So I'll rather make a robust tool set, and that's all about sort of figuring out what areas I want to focus on and be quite granular with, and what areas can be more loose and open to interpretation, and then leave the sort of coming up with the stories and coming up with the scenarios up to the GMs or other people who are better at that sort of thing than I am.
How do you make sure then that with that kind of approach, so open, there is less room for abuse of the rules and the system and getting completely out of balance results?
So in terms of ensuring the balance. Look, there's lots of examples of play throughout that do sort of demonstrate how the rules should be used, and things like the actual sort of real hard numbers and sort of health values of enemies and that sort of stuff. That is all there. It's more in terms of particular scenarios that I didn't want to be too prescriptive about. So the rules and the mechanics and the numbers are quite solid, but then in terms of whether you want to make it a modern game or you want to make it a game set in the 1920s, that is all sort of icing on the cake, so to speak. That's the fluff. And it's important, but the core rules will remain the same, whether you're playing a game set in the future or set in the past.
I'm curious about one thing, and is horror games can be or should be horrific, and they should have some sort of impact on the people playing the games. They should be scary, but being pulp, it kind of takes that strength of fear away a little bit because it's pulp. If we saw Indiana Jones shot in a different manner, even just changing the music and a little bit of the cinematography, it wouldn't be a kid's movie. It could be a thoroughly scary film.
Yeah.
What makes it scary then? How do you keep the terror in this?
I think it's what's important is to sort of have a scale of challenge. And I think that, if your player characters are going through and they are solving mystery, or it's like solving puzzles and riddles and maybe tackling some grunts and that sort of thing, then it's fine to make them feel really empowered. But in a game like this, I think the big bad should really obviously still feel quite insurmountable and quite scary. And in the game mastery chapter, there's a whole section on sort of striking that balance between fear and pulp and how to create terror and build tension when you sort of running a game of something wicked.
What kind of monsters can we find in the bestiary?
So the bestiary it's not huge. There's about 15 or 20 different examples. It's all sort of your classic tropey stuff. So you've got your more humanoid things. You've got things like, your cultist and your gangsters and thugs and all of that. But then you've got vampires and werewolves and zombies and all of those kinds of things and everything that sort of runs the gamut in between. And there's also it's also encouraged that the GM will come up with some of their own stuff. And if you have a look at the bestiary, you'll see the actual sort of stat lines for the monsters are so straightforward. I think there's 3 or 4 things, and the GM can kind of just come up with them even on the fly. It's that really lightweight and robust. There's you've got your health, the damage they do, and 1 or 2 other things, and then you really have everything that you need to run that particular sort of antagonist in the story.
So what would make one of those monsters, the vampires, what would make them scary in your game?
Well, I think it's how the GM presents it, like we said, in the rules, there's an example where they talk about a vampire and we say, rather than just having the player characters turn a corner and there the vampire is attacking them or jumping, running down the passage at them, rather like build it up and over like the course of an hour or two, like say, you feel like you can feel someone watching you, or you feel like a breath of cold wind down your neck, and sort of, the example I always like to use when I tell people, when I talk about horror, is the first Alien movie, the Ridley Scott movie.
Yeah.
And I think what made that movie so good is that you don't see the alien until the last 20 minutes of the film. It's all just suggested, and we hear sounds, and there's a shadow moving. And I think that, to me, is what really makes good horror work, is that, what the players can imagine is much worse than what we could ever end up presenting them. So I think planting those seeds of, what could it be, is much, much better or much scarier than saying, there's a monster and it's covered in 20 tentacles and it's a disgusting shade of purple. That's not gonna do anything. But if they hear a sound and they find something on the ground, it's some kind of slime and it stinks. Like those kinds of things, I think, where they start imagining what it could be, that to me is like where good horror happens, is when you've got these player characters like, what the hell could this be? This is like really, really, I think that's where it really shines.
What about safety around the table? Is this game a safe, or is it one of those that you should always have something like the X card, or is it something that you would say, no, you must have some sort of safety mechanism?
In the book. In the book, there's a whole bunch of what we call optional rules. And the one rule there that we say is not optional is the X card. We've taken there's a whole page on it. And because you're dealing with stuff where it could potentially be very triggering, I think any horror game has the potential to go that way. I think the X card, and it says so in the book, it's not really even optional. It's something that you should have on the table whenever you play a game. But I think especially in this, in a game that is horrifying.
If you had to take the main bit of advice that the book gives to GMs to run the game, what would that be?
So there is a section in that book, and I think it's the stuff that I've already spoken about. It's how to build tension and suspense in the players. Okay. And I think that to me is like just solid advice, whether you're running this or any sort of, I would go so far as to say any role-playing game, even not just necessarily a horror game. Even if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and they're going through a dungeon, I think rather than having a skeleton just in the next room, have like some hints and, like, oh, they find a trail of blood. I mean, that's like a bad example. I'm on the spot. But, I think that sort of leaving breadcrumbs for the players to pick up on and freak out and sort of let their imaginations run wild is great advice for any GM in any game you're running, but especially if you're running horror.
What's been the biggest challenge at the time of writing and coming up with this book?
Oh gosh. So for me, is like I said, I started it in 2017, and then I was limited by my own sort of imposter syndrome maybe, and just fear of putting myself out there, and so the challenge wasn't necessarily in the writing of the book, but it was in my own development as a writer and just building up my own confidence level to say, I can actually do this, and I've done things and people have liked them, so why not? I think, the reason the book sat around, and I was chatting to my wife, and I told her, like, this thing's been sitting there on my Google Drive since 2017, and she was like, why? And I said, listen, I just didn't feel like I was in a position where I was good enough to put something out. And now that I've done it, I still don't know if I'm good enough, but at least I'm brave enough to try.
Children of the Forest is a thoroughly decent game, so I think.
Well, thanks. Yeah,
I think you are. So, and actually, what's been the biggest moment of epiphany at the time of writing and coming up with a game? Well, the Eureka moment you've had that said, yes, this is gonna be worth it.
In terms of the Eureka moment for me, when I was coming up with the game mechanically, I think it was the Moxie system, or the health clock, because I think that was quite a sort of like, wow, that really makes people want to say, you got to like tread carefully a little bit. It's not just a linear scale of health points. I think that sort of clock that will wrap around and you'll start degrading very quickly, and it's very easy to die. I think that's a great mechanism to instill that sense of urgency and fear in the players. So for me, I don't know if that was necessarily my epiphany, but I thought that was quite clever.
And why didn't you go to Kickstarter or to Indiegogo to get this? Because you've done that in the past. Why not
I have, and I wanted to, but so I went into Indiegogo, and they were like, "Nah, we don't do South Africa anymore." So I was like, "Oh shit!" So, yeah, they don't do it anymore. So anyway, I mailed them, and they said, "Oh no, it's just not a thing they do anymore," which is strange because I've run 2 successful Indiegogo campaigns, and all of a sudden South Africa is not good enough for their money. So we don't know. We don't go there. It's just another joy of living in South Africa, huh?
That's very disappointing, and there aren't any other platforms that will allow you to do it.
Yeah, it's the thing is you can do a Kickstarter, but it's very expensive because there's like, I don't want to get into the logistics, but you need to like register a business in the States, and yes. It's like for someone like me who sells maybe 24 copies of a book, it's not
just not worth it.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's very disappointing, because I can imagine an awful lot of creators in an awful lot of places being completely run down and not be able to see it.
Well, that was it. I mean, Indiegogo, people always ask me, like, why did you go Indiegogo instead of Kickstarter? And it was because that was the only choice that sort of lots of people in sort of more obscure countries, that was the only choice we had. And now it's like, well, I'm not going to start a GoFundMe for my book.
That's very disappointing, but
yeah,
hey,
maybe they'll come around to it. Yeah.
So, assuming that, well, not assuming, well, people are going to want to take a look at this. So, where is it on sale?
So it's exclusively on sale through Ttrpg. You can just go there and type in Something Wicked, or you can type in Frenzy Kitty Games, and you can check it out there along with all of my other games, which you definitely should.
And is it available just on PDF, or is there a physical copy available?
It is just on PDF. I am working on getting a physical copy, but that will probably only be in a sort of down the line a little bit. But for now, there is just a PDF, and we will work on giving a discount to people who want to buy a physical copy down the line.
Good, because I like physical copies.
Me too. Nothing beats paper. Nothing beats paper.
Alas, it's a pity for the forests, but
yeah.
That's the way it goes. Right, okay, we've been going at it for about half an hour now. I think people know a lot about the game, and I need to ask you the 3 weird questions.
Oh gosh, I thought those were the 5 questions at the beginning.
No.
Okay,
no.
Dear. Okay.
Okay,
all right.
But I've already asked you this question. You should know the answers.
You have. Oh, well, it has been a while. It's been too long, like we said.
Okay, and anyways, you have to give me different answers,
Okay, I probably will, because I don't even remember the question.
Good. No, I like that. Enough of that. Right, okay, so what's been the best advice that no one's ever given you?
The best advice that no one has ever given me is that at every point in someone's career, they've all felt like they felt everyone. Let me rephrase that. So everyone at some point will have imposter syndrome. Even your favorite author or your favorite publisher or your favorite musician at some point will have felt that. So you're not special, and there's nothing wrong with you. It's part of the process.
Okay. What's the best mistake that you would like to make again?
The best mistake that I would like to make again. Phew, that's tricky. Yeah. Okay, let me think about that one for a second. We'll come back to that one.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll ask you the 3rd question first. You have a time machine. You go back in time.
Yes.
You meet your 10-year-old self. And you say to your 10-year-old self, do not do this. What is this?
I remember my answer for this from last time.
Then give me I want a different
one. I'm going to be really boring and practical and say study something in the technology field.
So you would tell your 10-year-old self, do not study something in the technology field?
No, I would tell them to not study something. Okay, so I'd tell them don't study film.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a young man's game.
Oh.
It's great for a hobby, but as a career, it's just something that you run out of steam for. I think once hobbies are fun until you get paid for them, and then it's like becomes work.
True. That's actually very, very true. So what's the answer to the 2nd question?
Just remind me what the question was. You see, my memory is not good.
What's
the best mistake I would want to make again?
Yes.
A mistake I would want to make again is take another hiatus from gaming. I think that I took one for a while, and when I came back to it, it really did help me sort of have a new perspective and a renewed energy for it. And I think that gaming for me, I know I just speak for myself, is one of those hobbies where I can sort of run out of steam after a while.
Okay.
And I think taking a break, even though it feels bad at the time, it does help to sort of like recharge the batteries for more gaming.
Okay, good. Well, those are 3 very decent and totally acceptable answers.
Thank you.
So you survived.
I did.
Well, thank you very much indeed for coming to the show. I'm looking forward to seeing anytime. I'm looking forward to seeing Something Wicked in print, so I can get a copy, because I want to read the book, and hopefully it will be widely successful and celebrated.
Thank you very much, Becca. You must have a great evening.
And that is it for now. I hope that this has been interesting enough for you to actually take a look at the book. The link is down there in the show notes, And let us know what you think. Let me know if pulp is your genre. What would you change? What would you add? What's your favorite pulp game? You can get hold of me on Twitter. I am at GMS Magazine. You can also email me. I am at podcast@gmsmagazine.com. And by all means, do find me on Facebook, where I am pretty much everywhere all the time. So, thank you once again. Remember to subscribe, and until the next time, I will talk to you very, very soon. Take care.